know what I like? Robocop.
Stay out of trouble.
I don't think there's a better movie that exemplifies the pure orgy of violence that was the 80s action film genre. After Officer Alex Murphy gets absolutely annihilated by Clarence Boddicker and his gang, he's reconstructed into Robocop and turned loose on the streets of Detroit to uphold the law, serve the public trust, and blast criminals to bloody bits. This is a movie that works on multiple levels, one being a solid and entertaining action flick, and the other being a satirical comedy that mocks the excessive corporate greed and consumerism of the 1980s. But ironically, it too became little more than a highly marketable product, especially with kids, when this hyper-violent R-rated film was turned into action figures and even a Saturday morning cartoon, proving once again that inside every 10-year-old boy beats the heart of a cybernetic police officer on a quest for revenge. Anyway, the concept of a big robot walking through a dystopian city and shooting gang members left and right practically begs to be adapted into video games. And oh boy, did Robocop get a lot of those, with the most recent, Rogue City, being one of my favorite games of this console generation. But the big guy's gaming legacy stretches all the way back to the late 80s and includes games that go from absolutely awesome on one hand to a criminal offense on the other. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a big bunch of Robocop games and find out which ones are worth playing and which ones belong behind bars.
Your move, creep.
The first game that'll come to a lot of people's minds when they think of old school Robocop games is the 1988 arcade game by Data East, which I can vividly remember being the loudest damn game in history. Like, no matter where you were in the building, you could hear Robocop every time someone dropped in a quarter. And also, a lot of people have very fond memories of this game, as I found out when I asked my audience what their favorite Robocop game is. But playing it now, I think some of us might be wearing slightly rose-tinted glasses, because this was my first time playing this game in about 30 years or so. And it's certainly got its flaws. We'll start with the positives first though, which is that this game looks and sounds great, and the basic gameplay is quite solid. You pretty much just walk to the left and right, shooting everything in sight, whether that be criminals, security turrets, and the occasional flying enemies. And when they get a little too close, Robocop has his trusty right cross to put them down. And you can also collect power-ups to refill your health or even increase the size of your health bar. And there are a few weapon power-ups as well, including that giant sniper rifle from the movie that annihilates pretty much anything in your path. Each stage ends with a boss battle, several of which are against variations of the Ad 209, and there are a couple of bonus target practice stages thrown in for good measure. So on paper, everything looks just fine. But the main issue I have with this game is that it is way too damn difficult. And I get that it's an arcade game from back in the day, and as such was meant to be a quarter muncher, but at times it just feels really cheap. A game like Contra, for example, is super difficult, but at the very least you're playing as characters that are highly mobile, giving you a chance to avoid damage. But Robocop is a notoriously immobile character. He's basically a walking tank, so avoiding enemy fire is really tricky anyway, but eventually you're flooded with so many enemies that the game itself can barely keep up, and your health drains super fast. So I was dying almost constantly in these segments. Of course, you could argue I just suck at this game, and on that, I must concede, because I have seen people that can 1cc this thing. Again, it's been a few decades, so what can I say? I'm a little rusty. Aside from the difficulty though, the original Robocop is pretty damn cool. Again, featuring some nice visuals and iconic sound design, though in my opinion a much better Robocop arcade game was soon to follow, but we'll save that for later. For now, I'll just say this game kicked my ass black and blue, but it's still pretty good.
Thank you for your cooperation.
On the other hand, there's Robocop on the NES, which isn't so great. It's similar to the arcade game on paper. You're still just punching and shooting a bunch of bad guys, but this time around, you don't have the ability to jump, which makes you even more of an easy target. But on the other hand, you can absorb more damage and health power-ups are more plentiful. And you also have a time limit of sorts, which is represented by a separate energy bar, which can also be refilled with power-ups. And you can carry multiple weapons at a time, swapping between them whenever you want, though you do lose them if you die. The most annoying thing in this game, aside from just how generally stiff the controls are, is, as others have pointed out before, the stairs. I don't know how much time I wasted just trying to go up and down these damn things. It's annoying to the point that eventually if I saw a power-up, I'd just pass over it if it meant I didn't have to go down any stairs. Anyway, this isn't a horrible game, I guess. The gameplay is just mediocre, and the same can be said for the visuals and sound. It's a fairly bland-looking game, and the soundtrack mainly consists of one track looping over and over again, which is the theme from the movie. It actually doesn't sound too bad here, but it's used way too much. So overall, Robocop on the NES was a big letdown. I don't think anybody expected arcade quality exactly, but something that at least played a bit better would have been nice. But then I turned my attention to the various home computer ports, and was actually pleasantly surprised. After having a miserable time with the PC Predator games, I expected similar quality for Robocop. But the handful of games I played are actually pretty decent. I started with the Amiga game, which is essentially just a straight port of the arcade, and it was developed by Ocean Software, who was really hit or miss with their games as I recall, mostly miss, but this is an admirable effort. I'm playing on emulator obviously, so I know it's not the same as it would be on an actual Amiga, but the gameplay here is okay. Obviously not holding a candle to the arcade original, but it's a perfectly playable, if somewhat wonky conversion. You punch, shoot, enforce the law, all that good stuff, and they even included the bonus stages, though the controls here are a bit slippery. At least they made sure to include everything you would have had in the arcade game. And by the standards of the hardware, the visuals and sound are also pretty good. I'm actually kinda shocked. I was expecting to be horrified, but instead I had a decent bit of fun with this one. Not bad at all. Then I moved over to the Commodore 64, expecting more or less the same except with downgraded visuals. But instead of a straight up arcade port, the C64 game is in fact something unique from both the arcade and NES games, though it shares elements with both. It's still a side-scrolling shooting game, but it ditches the punching and features original level designs. You can pick up the same type of weapon power-ups from the arcade, and there are plenty of health power-ups that look like the ones in the NES game. And instead of traditional boss battles, stages typically end with a mini-game of some sort. Whether that be shooting a guy holding a hostage while making sure not to shoot the hostage herself, or playing a match game with a sketch of a suspect. The basic gameplay is pretty solid. Just shoot all the bad guys and don't die. And the controls are at least manageable. Again, they're a bit stiff, but nothing you can't get used to. And this is another one I had a decent bit of fun with. The visuals are okay by C64 standards, but I have to say, the soundtrack on this game is fantastic. It's probably the highlight of the entire game, and again, way better than anything I was expecting, making this a decent game overall. And after that, I learned the ZX Spectrum version in particular was a very popular game, actually one of the best-selling Spectrum games ever, so I had to give that one a try too. And you know what? Yeah, it's pretty good. Again, it's not mind-blowing or anything, but compared to the other games I've played on the Spectrum, it's an absolute masterpiece. It's essentially the same gameplay as its C64 counterpart, and it plays pretty good. Again, kind of stiff, and the movement is pretty choppy as I expected, but this is a perfectly playable game. The visuals aren't exactly going to win any awards, Spectrum games being monochrome and all, but they're pretty good by Spectrum standards, and again, the soundtrack is surprisingly good, and even the few voice samples sound okay. Again, I expected garbage, but instead got a decent little game. Finally, I decided to give the Game Boy game a shot, and it plays pretty much just like the Commodore and Spectrum games. Just walk and shoot, and it's pretty damn fun. No complaints at all about the gameplay, really. I would have been happy to have this in my Game Boy collection as a kid. The visuals, once again, are adequate, nothing great, but certainly decent by Game Boy standards, but damn, this soundtrack kicks some serious ass, especially the track that plays over the title screen. It's like amazing. Somebody clearly put their heart and soul into this music. This stuff should be released on vinyl or something. Hell, I'd buy it. Anyway, those are all of the games based on the original Robocop movie that I've played, with the arcade game being the best, the NES game being the worst, and the PC games all being pretty good, with a special commendation for that kick-ass music. All in all, I had a good time with these, but we're just getting started because right around the corner was Robocop 2.
You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Robocop 2 is a somewhat divisive movie, with some people hating it as it fails to live up to the standards set forth by the first film, and some people loving it as yet another humorous and action-packed outing with everyone's favorite Flatfoot. I'm personally one of the people that really likes this movie, even though I can admit it doesn't have near the impact that the first film did, and it's missing that certain cynical edge that director Paul Verhoeven brings to his films. But with a screenplay written by comic book legend Frank Miller, and directing duties taken over by The Empire Strikes Back's Irvin Kershner, the end result is an entertaining and fun watch. We again follow Officer Alex Murphy as he struggles with his current role as Robocop, while also pining for his family and a desire to regain his lost humanity. While at the same time, Detroit is in the grip of a new drug epidemic, with crime spiking out of control, due in part to a citywide police strike. Meanwhile, OCP is trying to develop their own Robocop 2, a new and improved model to replace the old one. But they're not having much luck.
Stop or I'll shoot.
Eventually, they decide to use the brain of deranged cult leader and drug kingpin Kane to be the OS for the new Robocop, and he of course immediately goes on a violent rampage, forcing a showdown between Robocop 2 and the OG. And much like comparing the two films, the original Robocop comes out on top. Anyway, Robocop 2 is a solid film, and even though it had a troubled production, I still say it's a worthy sequel. And just like the first movie, it spawned a big bunch of video game adaptations. First and foremost is Robocop 2, the arcade game, which was once again developed by Data East. And this is a game that I have a ton of nostalgia for, as when I was 6 years old, it showed up at the convenience store that my relatives managed. And anytime I could wrangle a quarter from someone, I was either playing this or Street Fighter 2. And as I mentioned earlier, I definitely prefer this over the first arcade game. It plays more or less like a beat-em-up, except for the fact that you're armed with Robocop's trusty Auto 9 handgun to annihilate bad guys with one button shooting to the right and the other shooting to the left. And when enemies get too close, you can punch them or pick them up for a sick body slam. The view occasionally changes though as the gameplay shifts to a third-person reticle shooter, and these segments are also fun, or better yet, bonus stages with Robocop flying down the highway, blasting trucks off the road, and helicopters out of the sky. And each stage concludes with a boss battle, with the final stage being one long multi-part battle with Robocop 2. This game is just pure, mindless fun, and I love it. It's not an easy game per se, but it's definitely much more fair than the first game is, and it's not nearly as frustrating. It's also a couple of years on, so the visuals are significantly better than its predecessor, and the sound design is once again fantastic, with some great music and more voice clips, such as Robocop thanking you for your cooperation. This is in fact one of my all-time favorite arcade games, and very often when I've got a little time to kill, I'll happily load this baby up on MAME and blast through it. If you've never played it before, the Robocop 2 arcade game gets my highest recommendation. And of course, there were plenty of other Robocop 2 games, starting with the one on the NES. This is an entirely different game from its arcade counterpart, being more or less a straightforward action platformer that very loosely follows the plot of the film. In each stage, you'll be tasked with two things. One being to collect as many bottles of nuke as you can find, nuke being the designer drug from the movie, and the more you collect, the higher your score goes, which in this case is one of the two ways you can get some extra lives. The other thing you'll be doing, aside from gunning down bad guys, is arresting certain other bad guys, though some of them look more like hostages than criminals, and whoever you're supposed to arrest is displayed at the top of the screen with all of your other various info. There are a few mini games to play between stages, such as solving puzzles or getting in a bit of target practice, and successfully clearing these will also net you some extra lives. But for the most part, it's just shoot the bad guys, make arrests, and collect nuke. This game is okay. It's nothing great, but it's a simple gameplay premise that is at least kind of fun, even if your movement is pretty slippery and cheap deaths are hiding around every corner. The graphics are nice and colorful at least, and the music is pretty good too. It could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse. And this is the version that was the basis for pretty much every other Robocop 2 game. First up, we have the Game Boy version, which is pretty much a one-to-one copy of the NES game scaled down for the handheld. You're still collecting nuke, blowing away bad guys with extreme prejudice, and making arrests. Though this time around, I'm pretty sure you are just rescuing civilians instead of arresting them. You're not told this explicitly, but that's what it looks like to me. Anyway, this is a fun enough Game Boy game with some passable visuals and another great soundtrack. Well worth playing if you're a fan of Nintendo's classic handheld. Next up is the Commodore 64 version, which again is pretty much the exact same game as the NES version with one main exception. There's no music during gameplay, only sound effects. Except for the final boss fight where there is music, but no sound effects. Which is a major bummer, as thus far the music has been a highlight of all of these PC games. Aside from that though, this game looks and plays fine, for a C64 game anyways, though I wouldn't play it before the NES version, probably not before the Game Boy version either. After that, I tried the Amiga game, expecting another exact copy of the NES, but this time around it's at least a little different. It's still an action platformer, but now you can fire in all 8 directions, which is very nice. And you're still tasked with finding nuke and rescuing civilians. They don't even have anyone for you to arrest anymore, just blast every bad guy you see. A major difference though is that here the stages are much bigger and more maze-like, making it much trickier to find all of the nuke and hostages before making your way to the exit of the stage. It can be a bit confusing at times, but this is a pretty fun game. The shooting action is at least more satisfying, and the mini-games are better too. In particular, the puzzle segments where you have to shut off all of the red lights to regain Murphy's memories are some pretty cool little brain teasers. Graphically, this is also a pretty decent looking game for its day, and when there is music, it's pretty damn good. Though this is another one of those games where there's no music during the primary stages, just sound effects. That's something that's really been hard to get used to as I try out all of these old PC games. Anyway, Robocop 2 on the Amiga is pretty decent. And finally, I decided to give the ZX Spectrum version a try. And this is definitely the worst of the bunch. This one is more in line with the Amiga game. The stages are really big and maze-like, and you have to go through certain doors to progress to the next area. And you can again make arrests, but this time around they look like all of the other enemies. But if they're flashing, you can arrest them by just walking into them. On paper, that's all fine, but in practice, this game is super clunky to play, and the stages do get pretty confusing. On top of which, all of the power-ups just fall out of the sky at random, which is very odd. And overall, this one just isn't very fun to play. Also, once again, there's no music during gameplay, which is a bummer. So this is a game you can definitely skip. When it comes to Robocop 2, the arcade game is really all you need. But there is some fun to be had on the NES, Game Boy, and Amiga games. But now strap yourselves in, and prepare your minds and your bodies for the unbridled awesomeness that is Robocop 3.
Nope.
Well, I won't sugarcoat it. Robocop 3 has some serious problems as a film, even though on paper it could have been something special. Frank Miller once again co-wrote the script along with the director Fred Dekker, who previous to this directed 80s classics Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad, so the talent was definitely there. But in an effort to appeal to a broader audience and get on more screens, Orion Pictures decided that Robocop 3 should be rated PG-13, which was an immediate red flag. But hey, a Robocop movie without all of the edgy humor and excessive violence could still be pretty cool, right?
No.
Yeah, it's not cool at all. It's just kind of embarrassing. They stick Robocop with some TGIF kid as a sidekick, and the whole film has this made-for-TV feel to it. Even the Ed 209, a robot that once shot a guy over 100 times for the crime of just standing there, is now made as loyal as a puppy. Literally.
I am now authorized to be loyal as a puppy.
Look how they massacred my boy.
So, yeah, this movie was so bad they couldn't even get Peter Weller to come back to play Robocop. Nancy Allen only agreed to be in it if she could be killed at the very start of the film, and the whole experience caused Frank Miller to give up on Hollywood for over a decade. They even gave Robocop a jetpack and had him fight robot ninjas, and that still couldn't save this thing. And at the end of the day, it's one of the worst film sequels of all time. But hey, it's still Robocop, so of course some video games had to be made. In fact, some of them were released before the film was even in theaters. And I'll bet the quality of the games is significantly better than the movie.
No. No.
This is Robocop 3 on the Sega Genesis, which was developed by Flying Edge and published by Acclaim. And man, this game just kinda sucks. In theory, it should be okay, because it's Robocop shooting bad guys, but it's just so meh. It's a bog-standard side-scroller where the only real goal is to go from point A to point B with no frills. Nothing to collect, no one to rescue, just shoot the criminals that wander on screen, and that's about it. And a couple of the stages switch over to a top-down shoot-'em-up with the aid of Robocop's jetpack. And again, it's just kinda meh. I'm not sure what it is exactly. I mean, the controls are kinda stiff, but not unplayable or anything. You at least get a few different weapon power-ups, the visuals are fine for what they are, and the sound design is at least okay too. But I just really didn't have any fun with this one. And perhaps mercifully, this game is really easy and really short, only taking about 25 minutes tops to beat. Some of the games that came before it were great, and some not so much, but this one is just kind of a nothing burger of a game. I played it just to get footage for this review, and I'll never touch it again, honestly. There's a Sega Master System port as well, so I decided to give that a try. And believe it or not, I actually had more fun with this one. It's pretty much the exact same game, but it plays a bit faster, which is really all it took, I guess. And the soundtrack is somehow way better than its Genesis counterpart. It's still not a great game, mind you, still being a fairly standard side-scroller, but for what it's worth, I liked it more than the Genesis game, though I still doubt I'll be going back to it anytime soon. After that, I tried the SNES game, hoping it would be something different, even being published by a different publisher, Ocean, this time around. But nope, it's still the same basic game as the Genesis version, but again, it's slightly better. It definitely has much better visuals and sound design, which definitely goes a long way. And the gameplay is at least a bit more smooth. Aside from that, you know the drill, blast a bunch of bad guys, throw on the jetpack, the whole thing wraps up in half an hour or so, short and not really very sweet. But if you're gonna play one of the 16-bit Robocop 3 games, I'd make it this one. Then I tried Robocop 3 on the NES, and I gotta say, I like this better than the 16-bit games, which I realize isn't much of a compliment after I just shit all over those, but I found this game to be more fun even though it's just as short, if not a bit shorter, which is kind of absurd. Like, how short can you really make a game and still sell it to people at full price? Anyway, this is still a fairly standard side-scroller, but it plays okay, and you can get several weapon power-ups for your main gun, as well as some pretty nifty rockets. and the power chips you pick up in each stage can later be used to repair and upgrade Robocop before the next stage begins. This game also incorporates the jetpack, but instead of a vertical shooter, you just use it in a regular stage, allowing you to fly around a bit while you waste bad guys. A little bit of death from above. It's a bit awkward, but kind of fun, though the final boss battle is really lame. You just type at a computer while avoiding the robot ninjas. So still not a great game by any means, but not terrible. And the visuals are pretty nice, all things considered. It's at least a very colorful game, and Robocop himself looks pretty good. But the music on this thing is pretty damn awesome. I don't know what it is with Ocean games, but even when the game itself isn't so great, they always had their best man on the music. So yeah, another passable Robocop 3 game. And then there's Robocop 3 on the Commodore 64, and man, just listen to this. Like, who the hell was making this music? I don't even really want to play the game anymore, I just want to sit on the title screen. Well, anyway, this game at least does something a little different by starting us out with a reticle shooter instead of just another side-scroller. And this stage is okay, I guess, but after it's over, you guessed it, back to the side-scrolling, and it's, not so great. Again, kind of clunky, bog-standard shooting action with graphics that I guess are passable for the C64. And yes, you do get the jetpack again in pretty much the same scenario as the NES game. And yes, this game is ridiculously short, only taking about 20 to 30 minutes to finish, or at least if you're cheating like me and using save states. After that, I tried out the Spectrum version, which is pretty much the exact same game as the C64, except with significantly worse graphics and sound. Not a game worth playing, really, but I saved the best for last. Kind of. And that's Robocop 3 on the Amiga. So, Ocean obviously wanted this game to stand out from the crowd and be a bit of a graphical showcase, being in 3D and all, but that was a huge mistake if you ask me, because this game plays like absolute dog shit. It's just plain horrible. There are both first-person driving and shooting segments that chug along at about half a frame per second, and there's no real detail to anything, which I understand this is very early 3D gaming and that's the best they could do, but if that's the case, then just don't do it maybe? Like, they could have just made a decently playable side-scroller or something, but as it is, this is almost unplayable. If you can tough it out through the first handful of stages though, you are treated to a flying segment with the jetpack, which is once again in first person and moves about as slow as molasses, and plays almost like an early jet fighting game or something like that. Anyway, this is at least an interesting glimpse into the early days of 3D gaming at home, but I'll never play this game again. And overall, I'd say Robocop 3 got the worst lineup of games of the bunch, and considering the source material, I guess that's appropriate. After this though, interest in making any more standalone Robocop games kind of died off, and we were instead treated to a series of Robocop vs. Terminator games, which are pretty cool in their own right, but we'll save those for another video. And it wouldn't be for another 12 years until Robocop finally made his return to consoles in the 6th generation.
Not be tolerated. You have been warned.
In 2003, the simply titled Robocop was released on all 6th generation consoles, with the GameCube version being exclusive to Japan, and it's the last game to be developed by Titus, a developer with kind of a rocky history, and this was apparently supposed to be a high-profile game that helped them get back in the black, but it ended up being the final nail in their coffin. It features an original story for a change, but it's not anything we really hadn't seen before. featuring Robocop tracking down the leaders of a criminal organization that's flooding the streets of Detroit with a new synthetic drug called Brain Drain, which is an obvious stand-in for Nuke from Robocop 2. At its core, this is just a pretty straightforward first-person shooter. You'll go on a handful of missions, each broken into several areas where you'll need to complete some sort of main objective to advance. And there are also some side objectives as well, such as rescuing civilians and making arrests, which boosts your overall score. But mainly, you'll just be shooting bad guys left and right. And at that, Robocop is at least kinda fun. It doesn't really hold a candle to some of the better FPS games that were being released at the time, but it's always satisfying mowing down criminals with your Auto 9 or an assortment of other weapons, like machine guns, a missile launcher, and even a laser pistol. On the other hand, you're playing as Robocop, who isn't exactly the most nimble character in fiction, so you're going to absorb a hell of a lot of damage as you engage with enemies, which is pretty much exactly what Robo does in the movies, but he's not nearly as durable here. It's not a huge issue when you're facing enemies using conventional weapons, as they go down pretty easily and mostly only deal minor damage. So as long as you take them out as fast as you can and keep an eye out for health power-ups, you should be okay. But when they eventually pack way more firepower, you can be dropped with just a few hits, and that's when the game gets really frustrating. Also, when shooting human enemies, some of them will throw down their guns and surrender, allowing you to arrest them. But when this happens in the heat of combat, it's very easy to just keep firing and kill them inadvertently, which not only hurts your score but also drains a bit of your health, which needless to say, gets irritating very quickly. When playing a shooter, I tend to, shoot and ask questions later. But that's a good way to get yourself killed in this case. So gameplay is a bit of a mixed bag, but overall just kinda mediocre. And the same can be said for the graphics and sound design. Not a good looking game by the standards of 2003, but not horrible really. And the music is bland and forgettable. Also, the guy they got to voice Robocop did an okay job, I guess. It's not exactly a difficult vocal delivery to wrap your head around. And you do have a button assigned to twirling your pistol, which is kinda cool. Overall though, this game just left me pining for a much better Robocop FPS.
Hey, you can't go in yet. We need to wait for the reinforcements.
Reinforcements have arrived.
Robocop Rogue City was released on PC and consoles at the tail end of 2023, and it was developed by Teon, the same developer that gave us the very awesome Terminator Resistance in 2019. And their love and respect for the Robocop series really shines through in this game, taking place directly after the events of Robocop 2 and completely ignoring the third film. Nuke is still rampant in Detroit, and a new crime boss named Wendell Antonowski, the brother of Emil from the first movie, has some nefarious plans for Robocop and the city at large. And I already did a complete review for this game shortly after it was released, so I'll keep this kinda brief. But suffice it to say, Rogue City kicks some serious ass. For the most part, it's another FPS, but it is way better designed than the previous attempt, and wasting criminals is extremely satisfying, spraying fountains of blood everywhere as you blast them to bits with an assortment of firearms. You can even grab enemies and hurl them through the air or ruin their day with an old-fashioned right hook. Some missions even incorporate the Ed 209 or SWAT team, creating a competition with them to see who can blow away the most bad guys. So the shooting action here is incredibly solid and fun, and as you complete missions, you can unlock a ton of upgrades for Robocop, including increased defense and offense, faster movement speed, and special abilities that help you out when dispensing some sweet, sweet justice. And when not shooting everything in sight, you'll hit the streets to perform investigations and solve street-level crimes, such as catching vandals or even doling out parking tickets. And in these scenarios, you can choose to be a much more friendly cop, giving warnings to first-time offenders and offering some sage-like advice. Or you can choose a more heavy-handed approach.
The music is too loud. My sound sensor measures 126 decibels. You are damaging your ears as we speak.
Oh man, don't talk to me like that. I don't understand numbers.
Rogue City is enjoyable no matter where the game takes you, but obviously it's the most fun when it's just you and a room full of bad guys giving you all the excuse you need to use some seriously excessive force. In terms of the graphics and sound design, Rogue City is again excellent, though some of the character models definitely leave something to be desired, but the environments, for the most part, look amazing, and Robocop himself is a perfect representation of the character, up to and including a returning Peter Weller to provide the voice of the big guy. So from top to bottom, this is an amazing game, especially for a Robocop fan. And in fact, it's one of my favorite games of this generation of consoles, and certainly the best Robocop game ever made.
I'd buy that for $1.
So that's it, a big bunch of Robocop games. Some of them were pretty bad, but on the whole, I'd say he was treated pretty well with his video game adaptations, with some of them being amongst my all-time favorites. And I give a special recommendation to Rogue City, as it's still a fairly new game and readily available for anyone who wants to play it. For now though, such aggressive law enforcement has really taken it out of me, and I might just move on to a different kind of one-liner spitting robotic action star. So until next time.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.